welcome to this episode of Quakerism. I'm joined today by Paris as part of my Living Adventurously playlist. We're going to be talking today about the work in Calais, especially looking at the NGO Collective Aid. Paris, thank you very much for joining me on this episode. Shall we just start maybe just by introducing yourself, talking maybe a bit about your Quaker background? I know there's quite an interesting link with Ireland in this episode, so I'm very interested to sort of unpick that. Over to you.
Thanks, Ollie. Thank you for having me. I grew up as a Quaker. My mum grew up in a Quaker meeting. Her parents grew up in a Quaker meeting. So Quakerism has always been a big part of my life ever since I was born, really. It's sort of, as you alluded to, like split across Ireland and the UK. So I was born in Ireland, but moved to the UK when I was younger, and I actually spent time living in a Quaker meeting in the south of England. My mom was the warden of a meeting, so I was really literally physically attached to the Quaker building, and as a kid running around all the committee rooms and going to meeting, and it was like one big extended family. Came back in Ireland now, so I've kind of had a lot of time in sort of English Quaker meetings, which is sort of slightly different to what I've experienced in Irish Quaker meetings, and also it sort of represents different parts of my life. Like Irish meetings, I've only attended as an adult, whereas I grew up in a lot of English meetings. I went to a lot of young persons events in England as well, like sort of teenage Quaker events as well. So yeah, it's kind of two very different sort of experiences of Quakerism, I guess, that I've had in two very different places. It's always been a big part of my life.
So I think before we hit record, we were talking that you were saying that your first sort of memories and stuff, and being part of Quaker meetings yourself was around like 8, so kind of early. What were your first? Do you remember what were your first sort of feelings about Quakerism? What were first experiences of it?
Well, I mean, to be quite honest, when you're 8 years old, the first experiences are, this is so long. Why is this taking so long? What am I going to have for dinner tonight? When can I go and play? That's a journey in itself. I think like it's a skill mastered, over many years, actually, to be able to sort of be grounded in a Quaker meeting and sort of be mindful and really sort of get into like really good worship. And like to do that as a young person is quite hard, especially at that age. Like I would have started going to children's meetings, so only doing the 15 minutes, not being very mindful, not trying. I think at the age of like 12, 13, 14, I started to stay for the whole hour. I started going to young persons events where there would be like a 30-minute meeting in the morning and a 30-minute meeting in the evening. And that's when I really sort of started to sort of think, okay, what is Quakerism all about, rather than more than just, people sitting in silence for an hour and shaking hands at the end of it, what is the goal here? What do I want to achieve in this hour for myself? That's kind of what it feels like as a kid. I think for a lot of people, that sort of say the same.
Because I suppose the question has to be as well is obviously, especially in the UK, where we're living in a more and more secularized world, where being part of any form of religion is becoming more and more a minority thing. What was it like being? What was that like as a young Quaker against living in, as I said, a more secular society?
Yeah, you definitely feel like the minority. I think it was probably something I didn't speak much about, but also it's to explain Quakerism is a job in itself. I think, especially to teenagers at a school. Growing up, and I'd have friends come round to my house when I was in the Quaker meeting, and they're like, you're living in like a religious building. Like, what's this all about?
Right.
It's really, really difficult to comprehend. And like, I'm sure whatever age you are, trying to explain Quakerism is quite tricky. So it was necessary, maybe not a huge element of my day-to-day life in school. It was really that kind of the Quaker meeting and those young persons events were really like a very separate facet of my life. It didn't integrate very much with the sort of the rest of my life, and because none of my friends would have had a religious upbringing or anything like that. So let alone Quaker, which is kind of its own flavor. So no, you definitely feel that. And I wonder, like, do other people also sort of, would they say the same? I think they would as well. Attending Irish meeting as well, like now as a young adult, It's maybe even slightly hard because I think with Ireland you have it's a very Catholic country,
Mm.
and the Catholic Church has sort of lost a lot of its power in the last sort of 20, 30 years, for various different reasons. Their influence on public life is greatly diminished. And
Mm.
so to even now to say that you're at this age, in your sort of early 20s and regularly attending a worship session every week, a sort of a meeting that it's almost, yeah, kind of frowned upon. It's very, very rare to hear that, yeah, even in a country that I think is still less secular than the UK.
Would you say that's because of maybe like the latent Catholicism there, or would you like sort of against a more Protestant leaning or Protestant historically Protestant denomination,
Yeah,
or is it against religion more generally?
yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't know really. Yeah, also just to the Protestant, you'd have the sort of Church of Ireland, which is just kind of very similar to the Church of England and how it's run.
Mm.
That only accounts for 5% of the population. So again, even trying
Yeah.
to describe Quakerism, then I mean, there's only about, I think, 1,000 Quaker members in Ireland, in the whole of Ireland. So
Yeah.
to try and explain that or describe it is also very tricky. Yeah, I mean, you get quite good. I think I'm sure, like everyone does, about what are the key things that you want to say
Mm.
about, like, if you had to describe it in 30 seconds or less to keep their interest. What do you say? Well, this is what I say. So like. Basically, it's kind of grounded in the sort of the idea of having more of a direct connection with God. You kind of take out the sort of the hierarchy, the priest. You kind of that hour is kind of your own sort of little journey,
Mm.
without any sort of outside influence. There's no hymns, there's no prayers. You sit in silence for an hour. However, you can feel people feel called to minister, called to speak, and that can have it can again take your mindset and your worship in a very different way depending on what's spoken, if you sort of take that on. And that's kind of what gives every meeting, every attending session, its different flavor. But
Mm.
yeah, it's cutting out the middleman is maybe the sort of sometimes the phrase I'd
Yeah.
use. But yeah,
Yeah. Which I like, and replace it with many meetings, committees to
exactly.
make up for
Yeah,
that
yeah,
middleman.
much more
Okay.
efficient.
All right. So let's talk about let's talk about that sort of Ireland, Quakers in Ireland versus Quakers in Britain, because I've only ever experienced Quakerism in the UK. Obviously, I think being a Quaker who like looks stuff up and maybe researches, and certainly when people are coming into Quakerism, they might do like online research and stuff. They tend to get quite well, maybe a bit of a confused idea about what happens in America, where there's lots of different types of Quakerism. They understand there's, and then I know, for example, that there's obviously a lot of Quakers in Kenya and in Africa and so on, and that Quakerism is different again. But I think because, as you say, there's quite a small amount of Quakers in Ireland that doesn't necessarily make it onto people's research necessarily. Do you want maybe to I mean, obviously, you sort of mentioned already that there's a difference between how you experience Quakerism in the UK as a younger person doing and now as a young adult. But what do you notice as maybe some of the similarities, the differences?
Well, like I think you mentioned, yeah, there's a wide spectrum of how Quaker worship and is conducted in business across the world. I think ultimately it's not that dissimilar between Ireland and the UK, but there are definitely like some things that I've realized and acknowledged. I think obviously my experience is anecdotal. I just want to preface, I've been to a handful of meetings in Ireland, and I've been to quite a few meetings in the UK. It's just kind of what I've come across, and obviously every meeting is different in terms of there might be no ministry one week, there might be a lot the next. But in general, I think the difference tends to stem mainly from how people came to Quakerism and where they came from. So in British Quakers, you have what essentially a largely Protestant. Church of England is kind of the biggest church in the UK, right?
Yeah,
People come from a largely Protestant background to Quakerism. In my experience, anyway, in the UK. So like Baptist, Methodist, Church of England. In Ireland, however, almost everyone that comes to Quakerism, who is Irish in their sort of later life, is coming from the Catholic Church, and I think that's maybe where the influence is coming from in the sort of the slight differences. I think what I find in British meeting is that the language is further removed from sort of a Christocentric origin. there's very rarely a time in the UK, and I've been to a lot of meetings where I'd even hear Jesus mentioned, for example. Whereas, like, if I could count the amount of times that's Jesus or the Bible, passages from the Bible are directly read in meeting, and that's the first time as well in an Irish meeting that I'd seen a sort of slightly programmed meeting. So, like, they were going to read XYZ passage from the Bible that week, which I've never seen in the UK. So I think that's the key difference: the language, the reference to the Bible, to some of the stories in the Bible, and then I think also I know, like, the Quaker non-theist network is is quite active in the UK. I just don't know how big that would be in Ireland. I think there's less people. There's more. I think if you took a sort of census of regular attenders at meeting, that there would be a lot more people who would identify as theistical. Maybe. So that's kind of the impression that I get, essentially.
So those readings, are they so they're literally programmed as in on the first Sunday of September, whenever we're going to be reading this passage and this passage?
Yeah, like the first ever Irish meeting I went to, I'd like grown up going to UK meetings, and none of that. Like, very rarely Jesus mentioned. And then I turn up to the first Irish meeting, and they're obviously, as always, delighted to see someone under the age of 35. Brings the average age right down, and they're like, okay, you can read this week's passage. And I was like, what? Like, okay, because that was completely alien to me. So I think obviously we have to recognize, like, Quakerism is a Christian faith, and, like, shouldn't be crazy, the fact that Jesus is being spoken about, that God is being spoken about. But I think God is used less and less. I would say, like, the Spirit or the light. There's a move away from that sort of language to this sort of a sort of different sort of language, a way to describe what is maybe similar things, but just done in a different way. And I think a lot less references to the Bible in ministry, anyway, in the UK compared to Ireland. And obviously the UK, generally the meetings are bigger. There's a lot more Quakers in the UK. But you sort of, you don't see that. And maybe it's like that. Maybe that is an element. Like, British meetings tend to be bigger. The average site, like all of the Irish meetings I went to, are 5 to 10 people. And so everyone's got their own personality in that, like, if you're 1/5 or you're 1/6 of the meeting, you can have a big bearing on this sort of how that meeting comes. And you can get small meetings that really sort of become their own little thing. They could be very Christocentric heavy, like language heavy, or they could be very liberal, to use a better term. Whereas in the UK, if you have a sort of meetings of sort of 20, 30, 40, or your individual influences maybe less. I don't know, like that. There's definitely that dynamic going on. I mean, there's obviously small meetings in the UK as well.
It's a good point, because, like, my first meeting, there probably was around. It was quite a small meeting, and since I've come to Cornwall, and I'm in a meeting with, like, there's 30, 40 people. I'm like, wow, this is huge. Which is, but I can imagine, obviously, smaller population generally. So I mean, everything probably is going to be smaller. I think it's really cool, because I think I've done a video on the links between Quakerism and Catholicism, and I think there's a lot that they can take from each other, and I'd like to see. I think there's stuff that the Catholics do that can fit in very nicely with Quakerism. If Quakerism maybe was just, obviously we are very liberal in what we can believe and stuff, but what we do is can be quite restricted. So I think there's things that we can certainly learn from each other. Which one do you prefer? Would you say? Do you prefer meetings in Ireland, or do you prefer meetings in Britain? Which one do you think suits your condition better?
I think ultimately, like, Quakers in Britain is what I grew up with. I think that's probably more what I'm used to. Yeah, and what I'd prefer potentially. Yeah. Although in general, a Quaker meeting that isn't too ministry heavy, I think that's one of the main things I'd look for. That's necessarily what's in the ministry, whether it's more Christocentric language, whether it's less. I think it's. I tend to get very put off if there's quite a lot of ministry. I don't know. You definitely, can be, it can be really nice. It can be really add to sort of what you're thinking about at the time. But I don't like to have too much ministry. I think that's what I prefer ultimately. So maybe, not a question of Irish or British, but ones that just have certain dynamics. Smaller meeting maybe, and sort of maybe only a couple of ministries. Still trying to sort of work that out really, because I guess that ties deeply into sort of what you're getting from the hour and like how malleable you are to sort of being influenced. And I think it can be quite jarring. I'm sure everyone's had experiences where ministry or multiple people might stand up and kind of directly reference previous ministries, and it can be quite jarring to your own personal experience in that meeting. And that's a meeting where that doesn't happen. It's probably what I like. I've not been to an Irish yearly meeting yet. I think that would be it would give me a much better perspective to be able to answer these questions, to be able to directly compare more. Through young persons events in England, I'd be sort of involved in British uni meeting quite a bit, and even with the Living Adventurously Grant, I think Irish uni meeting would give me a lot of better idea of Irish Quakers and be able to talk about Irish Quakers and not just anecdotally experiences from like 2 or 3 different meetings.
Where do they meet? Where is Irish? Is it in Dublin, I assume?
In Dublin, usually, or Belfast as well. I think it happens as well.
Let's get started with what you did with your Living Adventurously grant. So again, we are both grantees of this Living Adventurously fund, which is available to all Quakers between the ages of 18 and 35, and you've used it in terms of as part of your voluntary work for Collective Aid. Do you want to maybe just start off? So Collective Aid in Calais in northern France. Do you want to start maybe with why you chose that, maybe the situation in Calais and what drew you to that, and then we can maybe talk about what Collective Aid does after.
I think Calais is obviously something that's quite prominent in the news. It kind of dips in and out, but I think especially in England, it gets a lot of coverage. What I've found is that speaking to people, they're maybe not the most updated about the situation. I think a lot of people know about the Calais jungle, for example, which was kind of a permanent settlement, but that was actually sort of broken up in 2016. So for a long time now, people have been kind of on the move. So I spent 3 months there last year. I'm pretty sure the situation is relatively similar. So you have obviously, I think, as everyone is aware, asylum applications are very difficult. People are fleeing. Generally, the population's kind of coming from Sudan, sort of northeast of Africa, Ethiopia, and also the Middle East as well, Iran, Afghanistan. People are fleeing for a various number of reasons, and want to come to the UK, and sometimes we'll try and take a direct route to try and cross, on small boats. Calais to Dover is the sort of shortest route. It's about sort of 20 miles, which is sort of undertaken over a night. So basically, this has been going on sort of quite in large numbers now for the sort of the past 15 years. But now, like last summer and this summer, is kind of at its peak now. There's sort of thousands of people crossing every year. But there is no permanent settlement. So what you have is essentially people coming to Calais. But you have 48-hour rolling police evictions. So people might sort of stay in their communities, like depending on the countries that they've come from. And they're sort of staying maybe on the outskirts of the city, waiting to get a crossing, waiting for weather, waiting, for various reasons or whatever. But they're on scrubland, but they sort of have to move on every 48 hours to sort of the police come in, and they might know that they're coming beforehand, sort of pick up all their stuff, their tents, and sort of move off. But that's kind of the cycle that it's in, just sort of rolling police evictions, funded for by the UK government, by the taxpayer in part, for these police to sort of do this, and to just kind of break up any sort of stop any sort of permanent settlement from rejoining there. So like with the sheer numbers of people and like the fact that there is no sort of permanent settlement, and the lack of the unwillingness of the French authorities or British authorities to give them any sort of help, or very little help, access to water, food, clothing, things that they need. A lot of sort of charities have sort of come in to sort of fill that void. So what you have now is essentially a network of sort of organizations, NGOs, in Calais that sort of are set up to sort of service different needs. So I sort of worked out of a warehouse with Collective Aid, which is one of these. But there's a lot of different organizations in the same warehouse. So you have, for example, Collective Aid, which basically was not giving out non-food items. So we specialized in tents, bedding, clothing for men. Predominantly, that sort of makes up about at least 90% of the population is kind of single men traveling alone, young men. So we kind of service that, but then there's a women's organization for helping women. There's a refugee community kitchen, which some people might know. They sort of also do work in London, but they would sort of be providing hot meals. You have Care for Calais, which is the biggest one, also sort of doing non-food items as well. Channel Info Project, which was kind of doing a lot of work with translating. They make a guide of sort of all the services that people can access. So for new arrivals, you just give them a sheet of paper of like, this is where you can get water, this is where you can get food, doctor, all of these things, translating them into all the different languages of people coming, and then also providing SIM cards as well. So you have all these sort of NGOs working together to sort of fill the different gaps. So I heard about Collective Aid from someone who I knew who'd worked there, volunteered there for a few months, and I really wanted to get involved with something. I, like many people, had sort of seen a lot on the news and felt driven to sort of do something. I had a few months free and I wanted to do something with my time. They spoke very well of Collective Aid, so I decided to join them. Originally as a volunteer for 6 weeks, so the sort of crux of my day would be sort of split between the warehouse, so like sorting incoming donations or like things that we bought, so like new tents, bedding, and then the sort of second half is then distributing, like doing large distributions in the center of Calais, or sort of in specific areas of Calais where people can come and they can sort of choose what they want. And we sort of try to, rather than just sort of, here's a t-shirt, give them a t-shirt and then see you, which is quite a dehumanizing thing. We always wanted to sort of create a choice, like being able to let them have a choice of things that they wanted. So we had lots of different things, like shoes, bedding, clothes, and they could sort of basically pick and choose, like a sort of market, what they wanted, which is kind of a lot of a nicer way to run things. So I was really sort of impressed with that and like how that was run. So yeah, I did sort of 6 weeks there, and then I came back for another 8 weeks and sort of took on a non-paid officer position to sort of help manage donations and incoming warehouse stock. So that's sort of just getting a little bit more involved with the actual logistics of things, which is what I applied for the Living Adventurously Grant to sort of cover my living expenses there.
So they're permanently being evicted from. Mm-hmm. So how does that work? So you're based in a warehouse, and because obviously the warehouse, you can't leave a warehouse. How does that distribution work, and are they just shifting location every 48 hours or so, and then?
So a lot of them would actually stay in the same location. It's just that the police will come every 48 hours and clear them out, essentially. But they move all their stuff and then they move back to essentially the same location. There are some, if they get too close to the city, essentially to the visible areas of the city, then they might, what they've done is where there's an area of scrubland right by the river in the central city, there were people camping there, people on the move, and then what they decided to do was clear them all out, and then they got massive boulders and actually just placed them on the scrubland so that you physically could not put up a tent. So some of them are permanently, if anyone tries to put down a tent there, they will be moved on. And then there are some more outside the city where it's really, I mean, when you say it out loud, it's just a bit kind of pointless. Like the police are sort of paid, that's their job, is to just go there, kind of cause a bit of trouble, move them out, but then people just come back again as soon as they leave, and stay in the same place. Yeah. So you kind of, in a way, is sort of like a permanent settlement. It's sort of semi-permanent in that they're still on the same area of land, and they can be for months, but they're, the police will just show up every sort of 48 hours, Yeah, it's kind of wild. And
yeah, it's kind of like this. They talked an awful lot about, well, in England they were talking about creating a hostile environment and stuff like
exactly.
that. I mean, permanently, have to upend, take up your tent and move, and then have police up in your face and stuff is. Oh, gosh, right? I didn't know that. So you were involved. The purpose of collective aid is that they are there to obviously. So non-food is that a choice? Is that just a logistical thing, or is that just because in terms of just fitting what all these NGOs are trying to fill the
Yeah,
void of what governments should really be doing?
yeah. I
Um,
mean, you don't want to, kind of. It's kind of pointless if you have two different organizations kind of offering the same service. I think it can be quite confusing,
sure.
especially for new arrivals. You know where to go. So yeah, that's why we kind of work together, and it's helpful being in the same warehouse in the same space that we can. There's kind of meetings between the organizations and coordinating. Okay, this event maybe has happened, so we're going to change how we do this distribution. So if we're going to distribute, then another organization who's providing SIM cards be like, okay, we'll come to your distribution so that we can also provide SIM cards alongside you providing non-food items. But
Got
there
you.
was a previous, I think it was, I can't remember the name of it now, but a previous NGO that was doing non-food items that basically pulled out of Calais in 2019, and then Collective Aid, which is an
So,
international organization. They have chapters in Subotica and Sarajevo, and also in Greece now.
mm.
They essentially went into Calais to sort of fill that gap.
So what was your what was so we talked a little bit about what you were doing and stuff, but what was your so you stayed so you there for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, was that?
3 months in total. So about half of that was just
Yeah.
as a
Okay.
volunteer, and the other half is like a volunteer or officer.
And so what was your experience of it then? What was it like for you?
Hmm.
Maybe just yeah. What did you see? How did it make you
Yeah,
feel?
I think the crazy
Yeah.
the it's an unforgettable experience. I think because I think a lot of people come to Calais, and the vast majority of volunteers are from the UK because
Mm,
they know the most about it. It's in the news a lot,
mm,
and so you have a sort of pre-idea. Well, you're kind of so much about the situation, but at the end of the day, it's news, and it's just kind of you hear about people tragically drowning in the channel. There's no
yeah.
personal element to that, though. It's obviously tragic, and it's upsetting, but you don't know these people, and you're talking about thousands of people coming through. But like when you go to Calais, then you're chatting with them face to face. There you start to realize, that there's so many different personalities. Like so many people, and I obviously never bought into a lot of the news would sort of paint them out as, to be sort of criminals, or people who are coming
Mm,
here and not fleeing any war, or like they're for whatever reasons to dehumanize them, to demonize the sort of the fact of crossing. And obviously I
yeah.
never bought into it, but when you go there and you actually meet these people, it's just like you really just see, it's just like the humanity of these people are just people who are working hard, who just want a better life for themselves, or
Mm,
they've really suffered in the past, and they see the UK as like a beacon of hope, really.
mm,
I chatted to guys who were really like really wanted to sort of be so productive, and you know like people who are engineers, doctors in their home country, and obviously that should not entitle whether you should go or not, your profession or your educational background, but it's just talking to these people, you just realize like just how horrible the UK media, some of the UK media is, just sort of trying to dehumanize these people, demonize them, and sort of immigration in general, how they perceive it, and
mm,
you just can't help but just think like this world is just so unfair, like these people they're risking their life. They by the time they get to Calais, we estimate usually they spend about a year of traveling. If they're coming from the Middle East or if they're coming from Africa, it's about a year just to get to Calais. A lot of them have already
yeah.
done a sea crossing. They've crossed the Mediterranean, you know,
Yeah. Right.
and they get to
Which
Calais
is a
and
lot
they're
harder. Yeah.
a lot more deadly.
Yeah.
And they're, Calais, they get to Calais, and you just they just want security. They want to have a family in safety. They and such basic
Mm,
things that we take for granted, and you really see it, like it's staring at you right in the face. It's so real, the fact that because I have white skin and because I was born in a certain part of the world, I have all of this just given to me because I have a British passport, And it's just the unfairness of it all is just brutally laid out before your eyes, you know. Like these guys just are risking their life for something which I can just, you know, get for free, get easily, you know, be entitled to, you know, because for what, you know, like how is that fair? You know, how is that equal? And it really just sort of shows to you just how unequal this world is. I remember when I left Calais, you know, like the port is obviously heavily guarded. There is huge fences, multiple layers of fencing, you know, to stop, you know, people getting onto lorries or boats and things. And like, you could, it was like a metaphor, like that fence was just like hiding all of the wealth, all of the first world sort of wealth and income. That's what it felt like, you know, over there. And it's like, okay, if you're born there, you get that. You know, if you're anywhere from outside of it, you are not allowed, you're not entitled to this. And it was like, you just, you really start to just realize, you start to think globally, and you're just like, this is just so messed up, you know. We're just hiding all of this wealth in little pockets of the world, and like, you know, this person can get it because of the color of their skin or where they were born, and this person can't. And it's just so cruel, you know. It was quite radicalizing for me.
I can imagine. It must be so frustrating, you know, that as you say, they've come all the way from, like, you know, Syria or Afghanistan or, you know, Sudan. I mean, Sudan, they've got to traipse through, you know, a good bit of northern Africa, cross the Mediterranean, cross through wherever in Europe they land, and then and then it must be then so frustrating that they've got, as you say, like a 20-mile gap. What is it do they say about the UK that draws them? Why? You know,
because a lot of detractors would level this like, well, they're already in France. France is a safe country. Like, why are they coming to the UK? That's really
that's what the government says, isn't it? But obviously that's not the case, because they do want to come to the UK. So I suppose my question is, did you get a sense of as to why?
I think it's a mixture. Like, I think a lot of the countries, the UK had influence there, so that's just why they would go. It's post-colonial, or like, for example, I know some of the guys from Afghanistan. They might have worked for the British military when the British military were in Afghanistan the last 20 years, and they weren't able to catch one of the flights back. You know, and you know, then maybe they worked with the British military as interpreters. You know, they had quite good levels of English, so I can only imagine that. You know, I would never ask, but I could only imagine. You know, they had contact, and then if you want to flee your country, that's probably the most obvious place you're going to go, right? If that.
Sure.
Or it was countries that were maybe the British had influence in the last century, or they just have they have family there. And also, I think generally I've got the sense, and some of the guys told me this, that the UK, despite all of the sort of anti-immigration, from certain political parties, all of the sort of speech of being anti-immigration, it's actually seen as quite a welcoming country compared to maybe the countries that they've been through, like compared to Eastern Europe, and the treatment that you get by the British police, is so much better than maybe what you'd get again. Like, I know, the guys that try and cross through Eastern Europe, Croatia, Bulgaria, they're physically beaten, like they cross through the forests, through the borders, through Hungary, and the police can be extremely violent. I mean, they'll burn people's passports for fun, and in France even, like, they're not afraid to tear gas you at, the slightest raise of a hand, or, these like rolling police evictions. They get a sense that the French are really cruel, and like the British are a lot more accepting of them. Not welcoming, obviously. I don't think they think that, but they'd be a lot more open and receptive to them coming in, which I think is interesting, because I think you'd hear anything but from so many people in the UK. Like, if you look at the recent election, immigration was at the top of the list for a lot of people, and Calais is obviously the thing that's mentioned the most, despite the fact that a lot of the immigration into the UK is legal migration, and it's
Sure.
This actually represents a small portion of people coming into the UK is on those boats, but obviously, that's the bit that gets the headlines and gets people angry. So but they see the UK as more welcoming, as more receptive, and the treatment by the police, by the system.
I suppose, putting it into a Quaker focus, how has doing this experience as a Quaker felt? How do you think it leads? Obviously, it leads quite nicely with Quaker values, but what was the Quaker aspect of that experience for you?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite sort of phrases that takes from Quakerism, which I've always carried with me throughout life, is let your life speak. I absolutely love that. And I sort of decided to go to Calais because of a friend I knew, but I'd actually at a Young Quaker event when I was 15, someone had come and done a talk about Calais. This was maybe in 2018, so a few years ago. And yeah, I think I was just really sort of taken by the idea, and I've always have been, of like, you believe in something, you believe that something should be done. If you have the capability to do it, then let your life speak. Carry out those actions. And I think, like, to go, I think that really sort of resonates with the integrity sort of testimony, and believing that I help, that I should, and I'm able to. And I think, equality as well. Like, obviously these people, deserve a right to an equal life. I feel like these people deserve, just what I've been given, what I've been privileged enough to have, basic sort of human rights, and a roof over your head, and a job, and the ability to have a family, etc. Really not big things, just simple things. And I think, we in Quakerism, we can definitely we have to believe that that is a right for these people. And obviously, but in doing that work in Calais, I don't see it as supporting them, helping them to cross actively. We have no involvement in helping them to cross, and it's ultimately their decision. But what we do is we try and just dehumanize the whole thing, and it's doing things that really governments should be doing, to sort of at least give them basic necessities, and treat them equally, treat them like people, people that are worth something. And whatever they decide to do after Calais, where they decide to go, is up to them. But for that moment, it's it's nice. It's just to be able to give them something.
I think it's a phenomenal thing to do, and absolutely, hats off to you and to the people who do it. So I think what I will do is, in the description below, I will put links to Collective Aid, and if you do want to give money, or that's a question I was wanting to ask as well, Paris. So I mean, if people wanted to get involved, what could they do? How did you get started? What sort of things can people do to help or volunteer?
I mean, obviously, money is a huge thing. Yeah, like if you have any money to spare, being able to donate, like any sort of NGO, it's constantly, money is always a concern. Like, where it's going to come from to be able to sort of provide the same quality service and be able to keep that up is really important. Especially coming into winter, like Collective Aid, I know obviously is non-food items, so it's tents, it's bedding, and coming into winter, obviously gets quite rough to be sleeping out like that, so I would definitely say that. And also, they're always looking for volunteers as well. So if you feel like you want to get involved actively, and to give your time, then a lot of these organizations they will accept volunteers even for just a few weeks, and you can really sort of pick what you want. If you're really into, I'd say, use your skill set, depending on where. If you really like making food, you really like cooking, maybe join the community kitchen. If you have a background in working with children, vulnerable people, you can work for one of the sort of NGOs that works with kids, or sort of even just goes into camps and plays with the kids, gives them toys. Or if you're really logistic savvy, then a sort of larger operation, donations, distribution operations, So that's always, people are always needed.
How did it work? So did you so how long did it take? So you decided you wanted to do it. What was the next step? And then how long from that initial sort of starting the process to you actually landing on the ground in Calais? How long was that, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I sort of first sent in sort of email of interest, and then that sort of led to, if the timings worked for them, if they needed people, that led to an interview. Now, all the organizations have different sort of requirements. Some of them just point blank won't take you unless you can speak French, unless you can drive. They just need both. Or like if you're working with one of the children's NGOs, obviously probably background checked and everything. For the Women's Centre, they won't take male volunteers, for example. But for Collective Aid, anyway, there was an interview. Essentially, they just wanted to gauge why you wanted to come. I think a lot of people can be turned away because they might decide on a maybe too much of an emotional basis to come. They see like on the internet or on the news like just how bad the situation is, and they want to lend their time, but maybe they're not right at that in that time of their life to be doing that, or it's too emotional, and they need people who are able to cope in that environment, because it can be quite a really rough environment sometimes. You need to be strong enough to deal with that, and to be professionally carrying out a job. It's a service that we're offering these people at the end of the day. We don't like saying charity, really. It's a service. I think, they want you to make sure that it definitely is the right reasons. There's a lot of talk in these organizations about sort of, some people have a bit of a white saviorist mentality sometimes. People who decide to get involved in this activism and this volunteering, and they want to sort of obviously sort of keep away from that, and sort of make sure that they take on people who are going there for the right reasons, who want to help for the right reasons, and also can offer a skill set a lot of the time as well, and contribute well.
Right. So that was so interesting. I'm really glad to have found out more about that, and hopefully listeners will as well, and we can get some donations flowing in. To finish off, got some quick fire questions about quick fire Quaker questions. The first one, starting off with, is who is your favourite Quaker, Paris? Over to you.
Okay, yeah, there's definitely there's a lot of candidates. I remember in school I did a final year project. I had to write like a sort of 2,000-word essay on a topic of my choice, and I discovered Bourneville and sort of George Cadbury and his work there. For those that don't know, kind of sort of, we're talking mid-19th century, on the outskirts of Birmingham, for the Cadbury family empire for chocolate making. Sort of built this large estate, the workers, sort of affordable housing on the estate, access to, gyms, playgrounds, parks, pension schemes. These were all things that were decades in advance of what the sort of reforms, welfare reforms that the government then brought in. So I think that's really cool, and just sort of showing people that maybe if you treat work as well, that they actually might work better and be happier. At a time in life when they'd just be worked into the ground normally. So I think that was really revolutionary. It was really cool.
And because I think it's really, I think I've done a video on like where Quaker hubs are, and I think Birmingham is such a Quaker hub, and it's in no small part due to the Cadbury family and what they did. And obviously, yes, that's down to chocolate and capitalism and all that, but it's also, as you say, the sort of the social work that went behind that, the building of Bourneville Village, and workers' rights, and how that was all done, I think was, as you said, way ahead of your time, and way ahead of anyone's time, way ahead of the time of the the government's response to workers' rights, and ultimately all coming from a Quaker background. So Quaker Birmingham was up there in my list of potential Quaker capitals. It did lose out to York, and that's not at all because of my own personal bias. But
definitely not, of course.
Then, second question: we've been talking, obviously, in this video a lot about testimony in terms of leading us to action and getting involved with things like collective aid. For you, as living your life as a Quaker, which testimony? I mean, I know that's they're dissembled in many different ways, but how you let your life speak, as you said it. Which testimony speaks to you best? Or which one do you look to live by? If you have to choose one, I suppose.
I think I'd have to go back to the equality testimony. Yeah, it's just so important to me that I think that there's a basic number of things that every human should be awarded and given, and like it's the work in Calais is even just slightly add to some of that. Was like really rewarding, and I think I always want to sort of just go through every day of my life just trying treat people how I'd want to be treated. So it's not necessarily equality in wealth and physical items, but also just sort of equal treatment of each other and respect in that, which I think ultimately it kind of ties in with just sort of leading a pacifist life.
I've done a video on these on all these different testimonies, and I find that the equality and peace aspects, they all connect, but I think those ones are certainly ones which are certainly harder, I think, to do, because that's when you have to deal with things beyond yourself. You have to deal with a lot of the unfairness of the world that's got nothing to do with you, but you're still a part of. That, as you're saying, when you're working there, like, I've got all this stuff just because I was born here and not there. By that random lottery, you've got people in the UK have access to this, whereas people by chance born elsewhere don't have this. And when you're looking at equality and really looking at it, that's a really hard testimony to uphold, because you're instantly put in a situation where you are unequal to other people through no fault of your own. And how do you look to balance that? I think it's why I think Quakers in Britain looking at reparations for their involvement in the slave trades, and looking to do something now to make up for that, I think is kind of a good way of starting to create a more equal world. But certainly, I think that's a really good one to be upholding, and certainly fits in with what you've been doing. My last quick fire question is looking at the future of Quakerism. I think it's important, especially as one who's experienced Quakerism from a very early age. What do you think the future of Quakerism needs to be, in terms of not only just in terms of to survive in as I said, an ever secularist world, but also, what do you think Quakerism does well? What do you think Quakerism should maybe do less of, more of? It's quite a broad question, but I'll let you interpret it as you want.
I think it's going to be really interesting for not just for Quakers, but for a lot of different denominations. Where it's going to go into the 21st century. I think what you're going to see is a new chapter in like how people, how people engage with their faith. People who have faith, and how it's exercised. I feel like I spoke to a friend of mine who's a Catholic, and just a tangent, I think like a lot of the social conservatism of traditional sort of Catholic teachings are sort of being taken away, although the core faith is there. How people live their life is sort of very much without the sort of conservative values that there were of the past, but still attending mass and still having faith. And I think with Quakers, I think I speak to a lot of people ask me this, because I'm a young Quaker. Always older Quakers want to ask me, like, because they see me as the ones who will be in the meeting in 50 years time, and a lot of them have a lot of fear about, is it just going to become a glorified meditation group? I think, that it just completely essentially breaks off from any sort of, any of its sort of Christian roots. And, I think in Quakers in Britain, like I use the word sort of liberal meetings. I mean, meetings that, they don't reference Jesus, they don't reference God anymore. And like, then if there's really no connection to Christianity in the language, like in worship and in ministry, then like, what are people there for? Like, what are they actually thinking about? And is it really turning into something very new? And I think if it is going that way, it's never going to turn around and come back. It's going to be evolving permanently in that way. I don't know where it's going to go, but I don't think it's going to ever get that like that, a meditation group. I think the core values will remain. Where those things came from will remain. A Christian center will remain. But I think, like I said, with every denomination, I think it's going to look very different to what it did 50 years ago. You'll have people coming into meeting who didn't grow up, for the first time, who didn't grow up in school, saying the Lord's Prayer every morning in school, the average age at a Quaker meeting, like these people would have done when they were at school, in the last century. Every single Quaker, like myself, has grown up in a very secular society. So even though you have faith, yeah, it's going to probably reflect in a slightly different Quaker meeting environment, I guess. Although how that looks, I don't really know. Yeah, it's interesting. And also where the vast majority of Quakers now, I think, come to Quakerism in their adult life. They don't grow up as Quakers. If that still carries on, if that still remains the same, where are they coming from? Are they coming from a place of having no faith whatsoever? Or are they coming from, again, like other sort of denominations, other Protestant denominations, or elsewhere? That would be really interesting as well. So yeah, I guess we'll see. No one has the answers, but it's interesting to think about it.
Well, it is because I think we've as you said, I think I've certainly experienced the same. The older Quakers, they're super keen on young people. They're thrilled when there's young people, and make them do all sorts of stuff. But I think that there is this. I think that Quakerism does have to answer some questions about what it wants its future to be, because I think, as you say, I think I'd like to feel that every Quaker sort of fears are we becoming a meditation group with that wants to do things socially, which I personally wouldn't want. But then, how do we stop doing that when we're getting rid of the Christian language and all that sort of stuff? But then again, there's completely valid reasons for some Quakers who come to Quakerism as sort of like an escape from traditional Christian language and Christian dogma and stuff, and they see Quakers as a really good place where they can be spiritual without the Christian focus on it as well. So it's balancing that line, and I think, well, personally, I feel at the moment we're doing quite a good job of it. But I think it has to be, as you say, as we get more and more fewer and fewer people having a Christian background and more people having maybe a more spiritual background, more generically, then how that balances could shift, and then I think that could be a problem, because then what would be the difference between Quakerism or Quakers and for people working in NGOs, for example, who have very core values and core commitments, and also do lots in the world to make a better society? What then becomes the difference? So I think that's probably going to be it. That's for the next in the next sort of 20, 50 years, how Quakerism deals with liberalism, because, as you say, if the Christian background really does truly go, it's not coming back. And
no, yeah.
Then what are we left with, and how do we maintain and then also similarly, how do we maintain our difference from, say, people like the humanists or the Unitarians, who are in quite a similar position, and obviously it's not about staying distinct just for distinctness, for no reason, but it's about well, who are we? And we're obviously not all Unitarians. We're not all humanists, though there are some who do both. But who are we? I think is ultimately the question that we're looking to answer. So I think overall, thanks so much, Paris, for coming on to talking to us about what you've been doing with Collective Aid. A big shout out to them and the work that they do. And again, please do have a look at the show notes for links there to find out more. Obviously, big thank you to the Living Adventurously Grant for letting us do the things that we're doing. And yeah, thank you for coming on and talking about it. It's been really interesting to hear about everything from Quakers in Ireland to your work in Calais. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Ollie. Thanks for having me.
So thank you everyone for watching. Hope you found it interesting and useful. And we'll see you very shortly, I'm sure, for the next video. See you soon.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.